Jean says in the chat, hey, what's the plan for Comic Palooza? Tomeworks is going to be at Comic Palooza. Sean, you are doing four things. Go ahead and tell us about them.
Oh man. I do know that I am interviewing my Christopher. Oh, there's a sticker on the front of his name, Christopher Ruocchi. And he is a very prolific sci-fi author. I am also talking about why we should read poetry. This is absolutely for all prose writers and readers as well, but it's an appreciation for the written word on the sentence and word choice level. As well, amping up tension. I do know I'm in that one as well. Let's bring the drama, let's bring the Marvel movies, let's absolutely make things as big and as crazy as possible in our novels. And that's super important. So, got to keep the reader interested. Absolutely.
So if you want to see us specifically at Comic Palooza, I say us. I unfortunately will not be able to make it this
No,
year.
you can say us. You are the collective. We are you.
So
You be there in
if you want to
spirit.
see us, the Tomeworks editors, at Comic Palooza, we will be posting on our social medias about what specific events, panels, interviews that we will be attending.
And Daphne, actually, if I may as well, because I've got this at indie bookstore day. Somebody was crocheting, and if you would like the sour orange sticking out his tongue, to be at Comic Palooza in place of Daphne, you can totally make sure that you make it there.
Take pictures. Take
As a
pictures of
little
it.
sour lemon. Adorable. I love them. So I'm going to share screen. I'm going to start on this because, of course, because I'm the one who is a bit more academic about things. This is wordy. This is definitely wordy, and of course it is. But feel free to break in with questions by doing the little raise your hand thing. I will totally see that. Or toss some questions in the chat, and Daphne, if you get a chance to break in on that, feel free. I want this to be a discussion about why we should do this. We're kind of a pivotal point here in history where I was talking 5 to 10 years ago about like how come we can't have this mixing between the two? How come there's such separate camps out there? And I think I've found a little bit in history about why that has happened. So we almost mind melded back in the day, but at first we were fully together. So the world of literary fiction has often been scornful of genre, and I'm going to define that right now as sci-fi, fantasy, romance, horror, and mystery. Basically, you have a plot that goes somewhere specifically. That is especially true for romance, horror, and mystery. Science fiction and fantasy less so, but there are definitely genre conventions that you have to hit to be considered in part of that. This division has led to confusion and consternation as they notice the hypocrisy of allowing some genre fiction to be accepted as literary and eligible for prestigious awards and recognition, while others are not. Since the inception of this concept, though, its division from genre fiction has been fuzzy. So, further complicating this as well, and this is at the suggestion of Shannon to make sure to bring this in, is upmarket fiction, which emerged in the 21st century and is becoming a major player in publishing. So let's see where this history and future of this division goes. All the way back to the Greeks, all the way back to the Sumerians, and first there was myth, which makes no distinction between popular, genre, literary, or artistic fiction. It is artistic as well as being genre. It is popular at the same time as being literary. And this kind of continued for, the extent of the spoken word as the majority of way that people were able to get across ideas. For sure, at the invention of the written word and moving that forward, books were written down, and the novel form didn't really exist, but myths were written down, stories as well. But most people were illiterate, so you had this oral tradition of folk tales and myths that continued all the way on until Gutenberg and his press. So first there were medieval romances, and those are kind of the first larger things that were included in printed fiction. Now, these had predictable plots and blended the real world with fantastic, but didn't really aspire to be art. So you could consider this as like the first kind of genre things. And then in 1605, actually, it was published half 1605 and half 1615, came Don Quixote, arguably the first Western novel which satirized romances. So this is a literary satire fiction that was making fun of genre fiction from the jump and kicked off a division that has festered in fiction for decades. I love this quote from the sci-fi author Ben Bova. The literature of the fantastic was the mainstream of the world's storytelling from the time writing began until the beginning of the 17th century. Boom, that changed things. So, the invention of the novel didn't create a divide between literary and genre, but it did codify the length, form, and format that would be used to give awards that would cement this division. So literary fiction novels are eligible for things like the Pulitzer, the Nobel, the Booker Prize, National Book Award. Genre fiction novels are eligible these days for awards like the Hugo, started in the 50s, the Nebula, started in the 60s, Bram Stoker, which is, I think, from the 1970s, and the Rita and RNA Romance Awards, which I believe started in the 80s. There's actually an older one as well. The Edgar Allan Poe for mysteries is from all the way back in the 1930s. But these awards are part of a chicken or an egg problem with publishing, which developed in the early 20th century with the rise of print media, which meant that they could drive sales through awards. These awards are out there to try and sell books. It is absolutely a circular thing that if you win an award, you sell more books. And so people write books in order to try and win awards. If you go out to the movies in late December, you might see a blockbuster or two, but you're going to see all sorts of angsty biopics that are meant to be awards bait. They're not trying to score big at the box office now. They're trying to win an award and be fresh in the minds of people who are critics so that they can win an award and do very well in January and February. This is very much a capitalist Anglosphere thing. In the Francosphere and Asian cultures, this divide did not develop as completely due to cultural influences, but also a lower threshold between intellectual and commercial success. In Japan, China, France, as well as I would say Russian culture, and Central European, Italian as well. There's not that big division. Like people who want to read higher at a higher level than a lot of American and English readers want to read. That 50% that Daphne spoke of earlier being romance novels, not the same in other cultures for sure.
So
So,
talking about awards,
yeah.
if you are publishing books, there are entire services surrounding helping you find and apply for awards because they know that that having awards sells books, right? So that you can call yourself an award-winning author, you can call it an award-winning novel. And so there are whole industries around utilizing this.
Yes, and especially in self-publishing, where you're going to DIY a lot more of that, and be wary of them because sometimes they want a fee in order to apply for it and stuff, and then you don't know what this award is going to do. You know, is it actually just going to take your money and disappear? But it's usually a good idea to research it. If not, I actually apply for it, but don't drop a bunch of money on it, especially on the self-published case. I Thank you for that, Daphne. Coinciding with the invention of these awards, publishers began to diverge based on economic factors. So printers before basically the 1870s or so, they only printed in one way. And so whether it was kind of a genre fiction book, aka early science fiction, or early romance and stuff, you're printed exactly the same as anything that was considered high arts. Absolutely. If you're reprinting, the Odyssey, you're going to look exactly the same, other than the book, title on the inside page as Pride and Prejudice. Absolutely. But starting then, 1870 all the way up to the 1890s, dime store novels and pulp fiction paid much less for soft covers, cheaper paper, poorly made bindings, lower quality ink, and they paid authors less. They edited the manuscripts less as well. So this was the kind of stuff that would not be considered special, it was just pumped out. It was sold to people who had lower income levels as well as education levels. So kind of the prose was not always as good. Not in all cases. Some people definitely were writing for these dime store things and stuff that were very well read and could write very well without the need for heavy editing and stuff. But it was part and parcel that this division came and grew during this time period. So awards for well-made books came first, both as community building events among universities and social groups, and then decades later, the type of fiction known as pulp novels began to organize and give awards for themselves. In the late 19th century, elite writing was it was the only thing that was available for these things. The Nobel Prize was an early one, as well as the Pulitzer prize too. So why is realistic fiction considered literary? This is from John Updike. The category of literary fiction has sprung up to torment people like me who just set out to write books. And if anybody wanted to read them, terrific. The more the merrier. But I'm a genre writer of a sort. I write literary fic, which is just like spy fiction or chick lit. So while early Western novels did not matter if it was genre or literary, this division was codified by the growth of institutions as well as universities. In the early 20th century, they started to deify Russian writers of the 19th century. This is where I'm kind of going out on a limb, but perhaps another definition for literary fiction is domestic realism. This is defined by metaphor and an increased focus on sentence-level craft more than allegory and plot craft. The influence of Gogol, Dostoevsky, and Tolstoy was solidified by the deification of Nabokov in the 20th century, who wrote most of his stuff in English in America. And in turn, this Russian influence was amplified and grew through acclaimed American writers of the 20th century like Henry Miller, Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, who all wrote realistic novels that drew from this Russian tradition using American melodrama. At the time, a lot of early American writing was realistic, whereas French and English ones really had much more genre convention to them. But it was just like you go to a museum and you see early American painting and stuff like that. It was just behind. They just did not have the technology nor the schooling to kind of do more advanced things, and so they were just very realistic. Absolutely. So I'm going to stake my claim here as domestic realism is a better definition for literary fiction, because that literary history of Franco-English popular fiction has genre written all over it. From the inception of romance in Victorian England to proto-science fiction in 18th century France, they were all considered to contain artistic merit. And when dime store novels of inferior prose arose, they contained both realistic melodramas and fantastic stories without a division. But where the original domestic realism was pioneered by Victorian women who wrote about feeling trapped by circumstances in their lives, as the greats of Russian literature were translated into English, there were all sorts of people who felt like it was similar. They loved it. They thought that was so amazing how they really captured the human condition in everyday scenarios. So they said, you have to write like this. Literature professors told people you have to. And over the course of the 20th century, this influence was solidified in American tradition as the only acceptable form of literature deserving praise and awards. When there were graduate programs for creative fiction, in the 70s and 80s, they had a no genre rule. You were not allowed to go in there
Hey,
and write
Sean, just
genre
Bobby throwing himself to
fiction.
the screen. We're here for the Writers Club, right?
This is Writer's Lunch. Yes, Bob.
All right, no worries. It says I have to request remote control to see your screen. If you could just press accept on that, I'll just go on mute.
Nope.
Goodbye, Bob.
Good try. That
That
was a
was a
very
bold
focused goal.
tactic. A
Yeah.
bold one. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, continuing.
So we've learned these things over the past few years. I'm not going to fall for that. Absolutely. So as we're looking at this domestic realism, and that's what literary fiction really is, 95% of it, absolutely. There's another version of it as well. Here's a second definition. Often literary fiction, genre fiction is not considered worthy of being considered for prestigious awards because the prose is not as detailed and clever as domestic realism out there. So on average, genre fiction novels are written near a 7th grade level and literary fiction around 11th grade. But this marker is not hard and fast, as plenty of genre novels are written with denser prose and a more varied syntax, and many domestic realism books are written at lower grade levels. So here we start to have a division and a gap between them. So the two results are upmarket fiction, which can be genre fiction of a higher reading level, and women's fiction, a category defined by domestic realist subject matter and a lower grade level than typical literary fiction. So in addition, fantastic stories outside of domestic fiction have been increasingly accepted into literary fiction, and I'll get to later on why that is often works in translation. So there have been times when this break between domestic realism and genre fiction, people got through. So the earliest genre fiction authors to be recognized with literary awards were Rudyard Kipling, author of fantasy novels, who won a Nobel Prize in 1907. T.S. Stribling, who wrote both science fiction and domestic realism, who won the Pulitzer in 1933. John Philip Morand, author of spy novels and satires, who won the Pulitzer in 1938. As well as Hermann Hesse and Albert Camus, both Europeans who won Nobels in the post-war period and were known for allegorical, fantastic stories. But few other genre-inflected novels were awarded literary awards in this era, basically before America became preeminent in in writing the best fiction and giving the most prestigious awards. So genre fiction emerged from the golden age of the 30s and 40s, strongly defined as separate from academic literary fiction, though it carried a stigma from the poorly written, shabbily published pulp era. Some genre fiction was well written at a high grade level and tackled heavy issues, not unlike literary fiction. You could have a domestic situation of a family living together and negotiating their lives and their relationships between each other, but they're in a subterranean bunker after the apocalypse has happened, the nuclear fears of the 1950s. You could have somebody traveling from planet to planet and seeing different societies and grappling with their own sense of self and really examining the human condition. So at this point, it's the 50s, 60s, 70s, and let's jump forward to academics of the 90s and all the way up till today. In retrospect, you're in the club. So classics of genre fiction from that first half are now regarded as having artistic merit and credibility. J.R.R. Tolkien, Anna isn't here to absolutely sing his praises, but we sing for you, absolutely. Published The Hobbit in 1937, Daphne du Maurier's 1938 paranormal mystery Rebecca. Daphne, I'm gonna do you know, if you don't know Daphne du Maurier, very spooky, very cool stuff. Frodo.
This is so good.
Yes. And Walter Miller's 1960 religious science fiction parable, A Canticle for Leibowitz, have been accepted into literary canon. They are taught today in universities. Among literary writers, admission that you enjoy genre fiction was rare in the 20th century, and admitting their influence on your work was basically impossible. You could not say that. But more often, these literary authors would mention myths and fables as things that were influencing their work. Genre writers, on the other hand, would freely mention classic literary authors. They say they love this domestic realism, whatever type it is, nonfiction texts, and their contemporaries as influences. So this century, here we are on the 21st, has proven different. Both academia and literary authors have come to embrace some degree of genre fiction in their personal canon. So here we are at the point where I absolutely tried to write a paper and propose it to literary conventions uh, before COVID. I think it was before COVID when I proposed this to AWP. And it was called When We Almost Mind Melded. And I really wanted to go into this new wave period. So the new wave of science fiction began in the 60s. At the same time, literary authors began to experiment outside of domestic realism. So, some great sci-fi authors like Samuel Delany, Philip K. Dick, and Ursula Le Guin were amazing in examining things about humanity and what literary fiction aspired to in terms of being really in depth about what we were all experiencing, how we can all recognize each other in novels. So at the same time, literary authors brought their examinations of the mind to fantastic realms. Thomas Pynchon, Italo Calvino, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Angela Carter all experimented with sci-fi and fantasy, but none were awarded a Hugo of that second category or nebula that they may have deserved. The figure of Kurt Vonnegut stands on a knife's edge in this time. Truly, literary fiction, absolutely great. Heck yeah. Fantastic tales, surreal landscapes. But he was nominated for the Hugos in 1964 and 1970. I'm going to say that was for Cat's Cradle, as well as Slaughterhouse-Five. This cemented his contemporary legacy back in the day as a genre fiction writer. It wasn't until later, until the 90s, that people looked back and said, no, this is literary fiction. It deserves a place alongside all these other people who won awards at the time. So if Slaughterhouse-Five could have won a Pulitzer in 1970, or Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, which was nominated for a Nebula in 1974, if it could have won, it's very possible that literary criticism would have had to re-examine why they draw this line and where they draw the line, but neither side was really willing to step over the line and be the first one to admit that they're more alike than they are different. I'm going to jump forward then. We're now, throughout the 80s and the 90s, this chasm between literary and genre fiction grew and stayed like that. But it was only in the early 21st century that these walls began to dissolve. So I'm going to contend that first this began with the acceptance of feminists, LGBTQ, and BIPOC genre fiction authors writing at a high grade level of the 20th century literary canon, including Margaret Atwood, Ralph Ellison, Ursula Le Guin, William Burroughs, Octavia Butler. This recontextualization of the previous century's greatest novels, finally, they were seen at a distance, as I said about Kurt Vonnegut being accepted as literary today. The likes of which, they were put together. So if you're doing a class, a history class, let's say, on mid-century American writing, you would include both literary fiction and genre fiction in that survey because they're all great novels. But this is maybe the first time now when people are valuing both of them since the 17th and 18th century, when that wall was much thinner between the two because of printing capabilities. So finally, these genre fiction novels outside of domestic realism started genre fiction novels started to win literary awards. The Road by Cormac McCarthy is arguably the one that kind of kicked it off. But since that dystopian novel won, people have also thought, wait a minute, Cormac McCarthy was really writing genre fiction way before that, because Westerns are another type of genre fiction. Those dime store novels are absolutely adventure tales, just like Robinson Crusoe and all that. It's just that the Western contained the genre conventions of this.
So it's fun because we're trying to define literary fiction, right? And you're like, oh, there's an element of realism, right? That's the Russian thing, right? But Westerns were actually something that happened. The Wild West was a thing. And so, well, is it historical? Is it not? It's kind of like whiteness, defining whiteness when we talk about racism, where it's like, well, the Irish weren't white, the Italians weren't white until they were, right? And so you see literary fiction trying so hard to gerrymander itself around
Yes,
what it
gerrymander.
considers real literature.
Yes, this is absolutely a gerrymander situation. I'm stealing that. That's amazing. I hope to give this again. Let's say it gets to a some literary convention at some point for sure. Other examples include The Underground Railroad by Colston Whitehead, which is an alternate history. The Overstory. Oh, did I write his name again? The Overstory is written by someone else. I'm wrong. The Overstory. Is a near future science fiction, 100%. They all won Pulitzers. Mo Yan and Kazuo Ishiguro won Nobels. Mo Yan for very fable-heavy Chinese novels, and Ishiguro for absolutely science fiction that he writes, including one novel that is like organ farming in the near future. Like, there's no debating that his work is science fiction. Like, it is. In addition, George Saunders, Jan Martel, Margaret Atwood won Booker Prizes. And George Saunders is an interesting one because I had learned of him from literary fiction, and then I started reading a book of his short stories, which featured ghosts. I featured a service where you can hire people to stand in your front yard and be Halloween decorations. I'm simplifying it, but basically that. And it was just this dystopian stuff that was not true in any way, but visible from here. Like, it's possible. And I was like, this is sci-fi. Why are you guys saying this is great literary fiction? He's just writing sci-fi. I still don't understand, other than the fact that he went to school for it. That's all I can say. But all of those novels contain fantasy, science fiction, paranormal, and other fantastic elements that totally are outside of domestic realism. So, come to the very late 90s, early 2000s, and a reader's manifesto. As quoted, B.R. Myers said, "Today, any accessible, fast-moving story written in unaffected prose is deemed to be genre fiction, at best an excellent read or a page-turner, but never literature with a capital L. If it's easy to read, it must be genre fiction." So this was an absolute criticism at the turn of the century, and it's still kind of true. But in 2001, Myers published this article in The Atlantic, subtitled "An Attack on the Growing Pretentiousness of American Literary Prose." He proceeds to disassemble the idea that literary fiction needs to be dense and difficult to read, one of the foundations of what literary means. This is way beyond, like an 11th grade reading level. This is like purposely obtuse. In the article, which he later expanded into a book of criticism, Myers decries elaborate, elusive prose and argues that what is praised as great literary fiction is instead the epitome of bad writing. If there is a 21st century purple prose out there, it is, the Cormac McCarthy, I don't use punctuation, the run-on sentences, the head jumping from one person to another, almost impossible to read fiction that is held up as amazing. So into this gap, which Meyer properly notes did not exist before the 1990s, grew the category of upmarket fiction. Also known as book club fiction, upmarket has three main components that set it apart from genre or literary. It is less calculatingly plotted than pulp genre, than genre fiction, basically. It's more readable, aka is at a lower grade level than most literary fiction, and it is mainly directed at an audience of women. That is in the definition of what upmarket fiction is. So here we have this division of labor means more labor. Now we have three categories. So upmarket is a term bandied about in the past 2 decades that has a nebulous meaning more related to Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart's definition of pornography, which is, I know it when I see it. Upmarket's creation was necessary as literary fiction moved away from character-driven novels. Now, this is much more used by agents and editors, but upmarket examples include the romance Lessons in Chemistry. Daphne, pretty much just it's a romance.
I mean, it's really a lot more about her personal. Oh no, lessons in chemistry. Sorry, whole different book.
Oh yeah, yeah, not the Colleen Hoover. Yeah, yeah.
Completely misunderstood what we were talking about.
But
Anyway,
Lessons in Chemistry is just kind of written at a higher grade level, but is basically a romance for sure. The murder mystery where the crawdads sing, which everyone, including my mother, read. The time traveling The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and the domestic realist Fleischman is in Trouble, which was firmly literary domestic realist, but was not written at the grade level that would have to be considered literary fiction. So the inclusion of appeal to book clubs in the definition leaves some novels that do not neatly fit into literary or genre boxes out in the cold, however. So looking at this definition from a literary agent, it has to be character driven. Arguably, there are both literary and genre novels that are character driven. Universal themes everyone can connect to. Boy, oh boy, same. Quality writing, tackling commercial plot. So that's that mix between literary and genre. Has to be of a higher grade, should be of a higher grade level. But the plot is very important, which is part of genre. The
these
aim is thoughtful discussion. What does that even mean? Yes, please, Daphne.
these are books that are made to be made into movies. Honestly, this is like if you uh like marketing as upmarket is yes, this is Netflix bait, right? We're wanting to turn this into a thoughtful production movie, right? Not necessarily like blockbuster, but
Yes, absolutely. Let's make it a little more low budget. Like this is something that can make its money back in the theater. It's supposed to start discussion. These last five things on here: concise and attention-grabbing hook, blends the lines of commercial and literary, accessible writing, and appropriate for book club discussion, are all things that are decided after the fact. You can't really even write to this. It's very difficult. If you end up with a manuscript and you feel like it's upmarket fiction, pitch it as that to an agent. Absolutely. See if you fit in their definition of what they think it is. But make sure you go for agents who are selling upmarket fiction if you're doing that. Because some agents only handle genre or only handle literary. And so you're going to get an automatic no if you say you're doing upmarket fiction and they're not looking for that. Then we get to this. It's kind of the spark of it. Metallic Realms and Outside of Upmarket. So Lincoln Michel's Metallic Realms, as a case study, by the way, it came out 2 days ago, is one of those books that avoids clear definition and may be exemplary of the need for a fourth definition. Because if literary and genre have grown so far apart that you need to create upmarket, what about the ones that are not going to appeal to an audience of mostly women or are specifically appropriate to be discussed in a book club full of different people? So this is Metallic Realms, an epistolary novel, which is a literary trait, about a science fiction collective, which is genre trait, that slowly dissolves due to strife, very literary theme, that includes some of the space-bound stories written by its characters. It's got the stories that this group wrote in it, which are very genre, and it's all told by an unreliable narrator, which is very literary and frankly autofiction. So while this novel has elements that would have felt at home in any new wave science fiction novel or literary satire of the 60s or 70s, today it finds itself unmoored. It's a relic of a bygone era, or it could be meaning that something new is coming. The only thing missing from Metallic Realms to make it an upmarket fiction is an appeal or pandering to book market audiences, which skew female, older, moderately liberal, and white. That's what book club means. 100%. That is who they know that they're marketing to, and they're trying to hit that. It's either people who normally read genre, who want to do something a little bit tougher, or people who normally read literary, who want a little break from how difficult some literary stuff, especially these days, can be. So, how come some things are genre and other ones aren't? I'm going to say a lot of it has to do with international influences. Literary critics and awards may often insist on domestic realism in order to be considered worthy, but this requirement magically disappears when they're talking about works in translation. It isn't exactly clear why this is so. People might have their own reasons, but the effect is enormous. As I said before, the two authors who had won Nobels in this century for genre fiction were both of Asian origin. So unfettered by an allegiance to the influence of Russian realism or domestic realism, literary critics loosen their puritanical urges and allow all sorts of genre conventions into their thin gruel of angst-ridden wordplay. Oh, I don't know why I wrote that. Sadly, this speaks to an exoticism, Orientalism as defined by Edward Said, that marks works in translation as coming from a primitive, irrational culture which fetishizes othering. These genre fiction conventions become acceptable when they're works in translations, whether the influences are indigenous or, as is often the case, we're writing this now, these are authors who read things from American canon in the 20th century when they were growing up, from the seminal English language genre fiction conventions of the 20th century. As efforts have been made to decolonize literature and language, and literature and genre awards in this past 2 decades have absolutely been given to novels that explore this concept. The decolonization of genre fiction must extend to a recognition that all writers can participate in the breakdown of domestic realism on, literary recognition. So we get to what's from the genre side. What are genre publishers doing to break down this line as well? Although strict genre fiction is still strong in the 21st century, especially romance, as we mentioned, offshoots and hybrids grow all the time. Publication houses are always on the search for the next big hit, and they take chances on genre fiction that doesn't nearly fit into categories. They're even signing authors who first saw success in self-publishing. Colleen Hoover's contemporary romances explore complex relationships more akin to Philip Roth or John Updike. They're angsty, messy, literary fiction. It's not a Harlequin romance, but it is written at a different grade level than what literary fiction necessitates. Jeff Vandermeer has found critical success with bizarre, fractured narratives in science fiction that is absolutely written at that literary grade level, around 11th grade or so. Colson Whitehead mentioned once again, reclaiming the mantle of genre-heavy alternative history, which was a very right-wing thing for quite a while, and to do a racial examination, and they've won absolute acclaim in literary circles. Karente Yoshimida, a literary author, has updated and expanded magical realism to reflect an Americana with world influences that definitely is genre fiction so much. And if you're a genre fiction reader, I highly recommend Karente Yoshimida. Her work is absolutely great, and you won't find too much of a difference between that and magical realism that's out there. Genre fiction's new penchant for cozy versions of every category have dragged domestic realism into fantastic realms. It doesn't want to be there. It would never claim, these literary people who write stories about, families that have issues are not going to claim cozy fantasy as that, but 100%, that is what domestic realism is.
I love that you included cozy fantasy in this, because it really is domestic realism with just the trappings of fantasy, right? It's just window dressing. The story being told is about the characters and about their relationships, which is domestic realism. But you're also doing it with elves and orcs and potions.
And that's just that little bit of metaphor in there, like it's not that different. But in no way would someone these days, let's say a literary critic, critically examine the relation between the two. But we can hope, in the case of things people read when they're young, influence them when they're older, of those cozy fantasy, sci-fi, mystery things becoming influential 30, 40 years from now, for sure. What do we want to do? What do we want to do with this? Can we mix literary and genre? We are authors in the 21st century. We're grappling with these shifting definitions, realignments. So, in this case, literary authors can more freely use genre conventions that they admire without fear of being banished from critical acclaim. And genre authors can expand their influences beyond cookie cutter plot structures to explore character development and wordplay a lot more. Readers of both conventions are expanding their taste to admit wider influences. Even if they had them before, they wouldn't say it. Now they can say it. And the chances for crossover success, critical acclaim, and book sales are higher than they have ever been since the time we almost came together between genre and literary in the early 1970s. So books of upmarket categorization tend to be molded out of this miasma, but are rarely written using conventional categories of fiction. You really should try and write something that would fit into that upmarket category, but there's no way to tell until you're done if you have actually hit all of the notes to get that right. This thing right here, presenting this today, was sparked by a minor Twitter conversation with Lincoln Michel. And author Lincoln Michel is an academic who teaches and studies genre fiction. His novel, The Body Scout, is a fairly conventional sci-fi mystery. Over on his Substack, in the article The Age of Genre Bending, which inspired this, he ends his thoughts with, "My must everything stay stuffed in separate pigeonholes. Why can't we indulge in all the aesthetic pleasures wherever we find them? It's a genre bending age, absolutely. Things can change and mold and reform, and we can absolutely find all of these influences and use them more than we ever could before." It was so strict at some point about I only being able to use the conventions, and you had to hit those plot beats in terms of genre. You had to write at a certain grade level, and use only domestic realism elements for a while in literary fiction. And now the sky's the limit on that, because one, you can go out and self-publish, and you can have hope of either gaining an audience straight up through that, as Colleen Hoover did. You can go out, make that happen, and then be picked up later on, or you can just try and pitch things to agents that have elements of both sides and actually get picked up because upmarket exists, whereas you might have been left in the dust 30 years ago. Absolutely.
I love that last quote you ended with like, why should we pigeonhole ourselves? But I want to come here and I want to plug genre for a second. Because as a reader, it would be super unhelpful for me if they just threw all of the books into the bookstore and said, "Oh, they all have merits. They have different aspects of each of these," because I know what I like. And but you put Colleen Hoover in there. I would be disappointed as a romance reader to pick up Colleen Hoover because those books are not really genre romance, right? They don't necessarily have the happily ever after. They're more about the character's journey than they are about any sort of relationship. And so I would be kind of upset. And that's why I like having genre romance out there to be my comfortable place where I can go, right? And I feel like when people are like, well, we shouldn't, draw these lines between literary and not. And, sure, yeah. But if I'm not looking to read something pretentious, I don't want to go and find it in my non-pretentious section, right?
I kind of love secondhand bookstores, and I was wandering around one the other day, and it was very interesting to see how they just created their own categories. The fiction category was divided up into classics. My books about books. There was all sorts of strange things happening in here, and it was just like someone's mind, like someone else redefined everything, and you don't have what would it be, the Dewey Decimal System anymore. You just DIY.
Now, this is why it's really nice having the internet now because books can be tagged, right? It's not necessarily you get one genre and you put it in there, right? You can do it with like there's multiple aspects to it, right? You can get as specific as like I want this trope. I want enemies to lovers, and you can go and you can find that. But like enemies to lovers literary, that would be interesting to see. Randy says in the chat, House of Leaves is horror, but if that thing isn't something you want to study to understand, I don't know what is. Ian loves House of Leaves and he feels the exact same way. I read so the reason I get like something stuck in my craw about this is oftentimes I will get recommended books that are like, oh, it redefined the horror genre. It redefined the romance genre. And I'll read it. And I'm like, it like glanced against the genre at best, right? And it's written by people who've only read literary. And so they
Mhm.
put like a little like sprinkling of genre in it and they're like, yes, I've created something new and revolutionary. And I'm over here just like, no, you like it's that's not the genre at all.
This is the fourth wing problem, where a romance author decided to write fantasy, and it's like you just kind of use some really basic tropes, yeah.
And for people that like romance, the whole romantasy genre is like that, honestly.
Hmm.
Romantasy is kind of like the what we talked about with cozy fiction is domestic realism with fantasy trappings. Romantasy is very much romance with fantasy trappings. And that's okay as long as you know that that's what you're getting into. Um, Rhonda has put a picture in the chat of George R. R. Martin's A Dance of Dragons labeled for young adult, which is so wrong on just about every level. And if Anna was here, if AP Hawkins was here, she would talk about how everything fantasy gets mislabeled as YA, which is she's going to have to give a presentation on that at some point because it's
I
true.
saw Colleen Hoover in my research, saw Colleen Hoover labeled as YA, and I was like, no, let's not. Yeah. I see this from Randy in the chat as well. Curious how would Beloved get gerrymandered or Kindred? And at the time that they were published, they were strictly genre fiction. There was not the option of putting them out as literary fiction or considering them as such. But academics in the 21st century have definitely gone back and written that into literary because they recognize that it is absolutely important to keep in canon of what should be preserved for the future.
My husband, who is listening to this off to the side, has chimed in that literary enemies to lovers is just Jane Eyre.
There you go. Like, I wonder about those because I was looking at books that came about in the 18th century and how yeah, Jules Verne, Frankenstein, Jane Eyre, as you say, Pride and Prejudice and stuff, were considered literary fiction because they were, given enough to push forward and be printed and on high quality paper. But they're 100% genre. They definitely are. But yeah, you can even look at the literary trappings of it and see Frankenstein is epistolary. It definitely has a framing device to it. But there wasn't the division back then between the two for sure. Here we go with Ryan.
I
If
love
Hemingway,
Ryan's comment.
yeah,
If Hemingway had his simple short sentences were published today, would he still be literary? I would argue that they would not be published today.
you need him in there in order to
Not that
get.
he's a bad writer, just that
Here
it's
we are.
not publishing's weird now.
Well, it's not. He was one, a journalist first. And that plays into his short, simple sentences and really straightforward writing. But two, he had connections. Because he was a journalist, he knew people who work in publishing, and that made his life a lot easier to get novels published. Same thing happens today. It's about who you know, not what you know. But yes, I would definitely say his stuff is not written at this high level. And I think The Old Man in the Sea won a Nobel Prize. Um, it's definitely in my list, but I was like, that's not, like high literary fiction in any way. But it was given to him, and like just for his straightforward style. So that definitely breaks the conventions of domestic realism, I would say for sure. The business rules drive me crazy. Thank you, CC. It can kill creativity. Oh, this was Lincoln Michelle's my recent post for sure. and I'm going to see if I can find it to put in the chat. But his Substack is called Countercraft, and he definitely makes a big point about that you got to write for yourself, that you can't try and write for write to market and break these conventions. If you're trying to stay in certain boxes, especially genre boxes, you can write to market and have success. But if you're looking at where's that line, I want to get in between it, I want to make people think, writing for yourself is the only way to get there. Yeah. All right. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to ask, unmute, say hi. We got rid of the one troll, so all of y'all are vetted.
He all stayed with us through the whole thing, so
That guy was so funny. That was great.
I just
Real
the
official.
guy
Like
bolder.
like what was he gonna do too? He was just gonna take over, and then put on whatever he wanted. So it was gonna go from normal looking guy in a podcasting booth kind of thing, whew, to something crazy.
Oh well.
So next week
I
talking
have.
to
Oh, Randy's here.
please.
Oh, yes. I
Yes.
just wanted to say I've heard of these live stream hijackers that do
Mhm.
this on purpose, and they're live streaming as they hijack and put up very, very inappropriate things.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We've had run-ins with them, yeah.
Oh, you
Not
have?
like this. That was impressive, but no, not. But we've had people put up pretty bad things before, so.
Believe it. Good catch. Good catch.
Hand over control. Here you are, sir. No.
The audacity.
Now we're going to be featured on that channel, so that'll be nice. That'll drive some traffic. Absolutely.
All right. Well, yeah, as Sean was saying, next week we're going to be talking with Shannon about how to create your street team for getting your book launched.
Like a small child, dressed in rags, trying to sell your novel on the street corner. That's the Charles Dickens way to go. Absolutely. Awesome. Have a great day, y'all.